Today I'm talking to Gregg Levoy. Gregg Levoy has been at the Unity of the Triangle before, and he had, I think, the highest attended workshop we had in the time I've been here. And I want to say that I'm happy to have him back because he's going to talk to us today about the insights that we might be receiving by being part of the coronavirus lockdowns and isolations. And if you don't remember Greg was largely talking about what is our purpose back a couple of years ago. He's famed for his book called Callings, which is about the very same thing. And the work he'll be doing with us in the month of March is related to this idea that we will have been changed by the coronavirus experience, and what can we glean from that, and then where do we go with it? So I'm really happy to have Gregg here. It's a topic I think we all could get excited about, or at least begrudgingly admit we're in it. And so, Gregg, thank you for being here. I hope you are doing well there on the West Coast.
Yes, I am doing well here, as well as can be expected given all of this tumultuousness. But yes, and thanks for having me on this show.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. We're only a little bit of technology apart, even though there is quite a few miles. And so, Gregg, I think if you don't mind, could you just give us some of your observations about what you've noticed is coming about in this time period?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of something that I remember Redd Foxx saying. Remember Redd Foxx from comedian from Sanford and Son?
Easy.
Yeah, well, right.
Yeah.
He once made I thought, a brilliant observation about human nature. He said, heroes are not born, they're cornered. And I thought that was really an interesting insight. And what I took from that is that people are often forced into heroism or growth or evolution or self-reflection by their own suffering, by sometimes their own desperation. And I see a certain amount of that dynamic happening since a year ago now, in our pandemic. I see some of that, people being forced into growth and evolution by the chaos of all this. And I look back, for instance, I look at my own timeline of my own life, and I see that the growth spurts in my life very much corresponded to times of crisis or loss or upheaval. And it's a pretty consistent pattern I've noticed, and I'm seeing that unfolding as well here, is that people seem to be going in kind of one of two directions, I think. One is toward resilience and growth and trying to make the best of it, and what people traditionally refer to as making lemons into lemonade. And then there are the others who are going in the opposite direction. I see, and I've seen this in the statistics as well, a lot of addictive behavior. So huge spikes in television watching, alcohol use and abuse, online shopping, and eating. And so I'm seeing sometimes both of them happening simultaneously, but there's a lot of both of that going on. And I've certainly seen people rising to this occasion by and large and finding the growth in it, discovering things about themselves that they didn't know, that they wouldn't have discovered if they hadn't been pressed into consciousness by the pandemic. So I'm certainly seeing that kind of thing.
I was talking with a friend also on the West Coast, and he was talking with one of his Stanford friends, and I think he was like a Fulbright scholar or something. He said, so how are you doing with this whole pandemic thing? He says, yeah, well, I'm watching a lot more TV, I'm drinking more, et cetera, et cetera. So right. I think we all, even the high achievers, some of us are falling deeply into the crack. I find myself going, check, yeah, I'm doing all that. Yep, all that.
Right.
So how do we make the most of it then if we're given to that? And I do think peculiarly given to it these days. I'm not really sure why. I have supposed for me that my necessity of doing things immediately has been diminished. So there's, I can be procrastinating without consequence because I have longer to do it. And I think that has led to a sloth and just degenerate behavior in general. And so I'm wondering if getting busy will bring me out of it, or is that, or do you have other suggestions?
Yeah. Well, yeah, getting busy. I think a lot of us have simply been knocked off our treadmills, and we don't have the busyness as usual that takes up our time. And in some ways, that may actually be a good thing. I've heard this a lot from people throughout the pandemic, is that they now have more time and leisure and space to ask themselves some of these luxurious questions like, am I enjoying what I'm doing in my old normal? Do I like my work? They're starting to reassess. I guess reassessment is the word. To look at their life and look at their relationships. For instance, I've heard from a number of people that they had, prior to the pandemic, they had social engagements or business engagements on the calendars that the pandemic prevented them from doing, but which they realized was actually a relief to them that they didn't have to do. And so now they're assessing, in my new normal, do I want to go back to that, or forward to that? How important are those relationships? How important was that activity, those engagements, those involvements? And that's kind of interesting that people are having the space to look at whether their old normal was even working for them. And so I'm seeing a lot of reassessing behavior, and some people just plain old saying, I am not looking forward to getting back to normal because some of that wasn't working all that well for me. I've really enjoyed the space. Maybe some of the degenerate behavior, some of the leisure, some of the sloth, which by our workaholic standards looks like sloth, but it may just be work-life balance or leisure or relaxation, more people meditating and being contemplative and having time for reading and being out in nature. So the question is, what do I want my new normal to look like? Do I want it to look like the old? Because in some ways, the old normal is what got us into that mess to begin with.
Yeah, I hear you. I do think we do tend to do things by rote, and if a little was good, a lot must be better.
Right.
So coming into balance would be a great thing. I'm thinking in particular about one thing I had promised myself I would do, because I figured we had 6 months of this, or maybe that much, that I would learn Spanish. I can't say I've done that. And and so I recognize those things that are left undone, and maybe they're not really that important, but it's a good idea anyway to learn Spanish. But my sense is, though, that if people looked around, they have dropped some things, and maybe they dropped some things they should keep and some things they should let go of. And I guess we're back to the whole question that is always posed to us is, are we using our time wisely? And the discernment practices of knowing what it is ours to do, and then having the gumption and the dedication to do it.
Right. So, there's a dynamic along those lines that I'm seeing during the pandemic that I remember seeing during the recession back in 08, 09. There were a lot of people that came into my type of workshops, like callings type workshops, that had now, sort of by force, of course, they had the leisure to look at their lives from a bigger perspective. And they were asking questions about, well, what direction do I want to move in now? What is my deeper purpose that maybe I'm not getting to because I'm on the treadmill all the time? So I'm seeing a lot of people asking those kind of questions. And I think that's really a great idea. What they're going to be up against, of course, now that there's a vaccine and there's light at the end of the tunnel, is the conflict between this more contemplative way that some of us have been during the pandemic, at least when we're not panicking, and the part of us that is hungry, if not desperate, to get back to normal. And I have a feeling that's going to be a big conflict for a lot of us. I know it is for me. I've loved some of the freedoms that I've had during the pandemic, and some of the new skills and some of the new relationships that I'm developing, a whole new way of teaching, for instance, meaning online as opposed to in person. I'm afraid that once the world opens back up, I'm just going to get back to my old normal. And it's going to be a conflict, I think, for a lot of people to keep some of the things that they got. And I've heard people worrying about this. I'm worried. One guy said that my greed is going to come back, is the way he put it. Getting back into the rat race and buying things and being the workaholic that he normally is. And he's saying, I'm afraid that my greed is going to come back, and I'm just going to want to go shopping, and I'm going to want to go out to eat and drink and party and all of that. And those are very real considerations for some people. Is some people have really flowered as a result of this pandemic. I don't want to suggest that that's happening for most people, but a lot of people have said this is in some ways is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I have to admit that the pandemic has been the best thing to happen to my writing in years, because it's given me a tremendous focus and a lot of very juicy, compelling subjects to write about. So there's a part of me that's kind of attached to the drama of it all, because the writer in me is licking my chops.
Yes, I think compelled introspection is one of the benefits of this time, and to come to clarity about ourselves. Sometimes it takes a long time. It takes a lot of sitting and waiting for the answer to come through. I've often felt like I remember some of the big decisions in my life. I'd say, "What about this?" And it wouldn't be like, well, the light would go off immediately. It would be, I would mull it one direction and then the other before it ever came to clarity.
You know what's another interesting? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
Another interesting angle of this is that the pandemic is flushed up to the surface what people refer to as stranger danger. So people are suddenly dangerous to one another, which is why we've been told to physically, socially isolate, only do air hugging and quarantining and all that. So there's a sense of almost paranoia in people being afraid of one another. And we're being told to do something that doesn't come at all naturally to the social animal that we are, which is stay away from each other. At the same time, we are being asked to extend our field of sympathies to include the stranger by wearing masks, by washing our hands, by staying away from each other. All these behaviors, what we're being asked to do is care for the community. And I think that's hard for humans. We're used to caring about those closest to us, but to extend our sympathies to include people we don't even know is an interesting dichotomy to have to kind of juggle those two things. We're afraid of strangers and we're being asked to care for them. And the very act of washing your hands and wearing a mask and socially isolating is an act of not just self-care, but community care. And that's so interesting because to me, community building starts with the stranger. All community building starts with the stranger. People don't know one another, and then they come to know one another. So it's an interesting conflict, I think, to be scared of strangers and caring about them at the same time. So we're dealing with that.
Yes, we just did a series on the Dalai Lama's book, How to Expand Love, and it largely starts by loving somebody that you know well, that you really do actually already love, and then practicing the art of taking that and placing it on the stranger and then the enemy. And I find it to be a brilliant process, but one that takes a bit of repeating to get any depth with. And yet this thing about fear of the stranger, there's also the relief of I don't have to interact with you, which is, do you know what I mean? For people who are, for shy persons like myself, you can pretty much hide behind your mask the whole time.
Right.
And so when we come back together, do you think we have a formula for how to blend those competing ideas into a healthy way?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, there's certainly precedence for how we can be. I'm thinking of what happened I remember the several weeks to month after the 9/11 bombings. What I remember seeing, and people were talking about it in the media, was that people's behavior changed in the aftermath of that event. They were holding doors open for strangers. They were paying the toll booth fare for the guy behind them. They were honking less and listening more and spending more time with their kids. And I think that people often feel the most alive precisely during times of crisis. And I think moving out of the crisis, to whatever degree we end up doing that this year, I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to try to remember how hungry we were for connection during the crisis, how lonesome we felt, or how much a sense of loss and grief we felt around the loss of touch, and to try to just remember what it was like for us when we were in lockdown, and try to keep that in mind as we move forward back out into our red and blue world, our us and them world. I just think it's going to be important to try to remember how it felt while we were in it, how much we missed one another.
Greg, I think you're right on. I do remember the ironic thing that President Bush said at the time was, to be patriotic, you need to go back to shopping. And I thought we were in such a pregnant moment of communal experience, and yet commerce seemed to be calling us, get back in, spend, keep the economy moving. And really, I think we missed a golden opportunity in several ways during that time period to readjust the American ethos in general.
Right.
And I think you're right about this. This could be another time in which we recognize that more stuff, more busyness, more fame, or whatever we think, or more shit saying on Facebook, look how great I am. More of that, it may not actually be the solution. Right. As we are talking, I'm thinking about the Beatitudes, the blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall receive the kingdom of heaven. When we recognize our needs, when we are not just so full of it, is when we make progress, I think.
Yeah. So that's actually part of my agenda, if you will, in, say, the presentations that I'm going to be offering there in March. What I ideally want people to walk away from, say, especially the webinar with, which is the hands-on piece, is a sense of what can I take forward from what I've learned in this past year? What did I learn, for one thing, to really get a bead on what I discovered, what I learned, what I achieved, what wanted to emerge for me in this pandemic year? And then how do I want to take that moving forward? What do I want my new normal to look like once the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, which hopefully it will be sometime this year. But that's really kind of my agenda. I want people to really get a snapshot, or a mugshot, as the case may be, of what happened to them this past year, what they learned about themselves, what they discovered about their priorities, and to try to remember to bring those forward into the future and see how they can anchor that in whatever the new normal turns out to be.
Yeah, Greg, I'm glad you're doing this webinar with us, because one of the things I've noticed is that it's when we actually declare it, bring it all the way up to consciousness, bring it up to words, write it down, or some way speak it, to someone else, that's when it becomes real for us.
Right.
When it's drifting through as thoughts and maybe this, a little of some of that, a vague feeling, we don't have the capacity to use it. It hasn't yet formed. It needs to gel. It's almost like the particle in the wave thing. It's kind of hanging out there as a wave, and you need to claim it as something.
Right. And I think, if nothing else, when I ask my usual nosy personal questions, which you might remember I do in my workshops, I'm going to open it up every time to let people share it, because I think there's something really powerful about simply hearing yourself say some of these things out loud. This is what I learned this year about myself. This is what I want to take with me moving forward. This is what I'm afraid I might lose in the whatever the craziness of the new normal looks like. And something about going public is, I think, important to people to hear themselves say it.
Yeah, I think that's really true. We just did a memorial for one of our favorite people in this church. And I was reminded by doing that when you come to the end of something and then you declare what it was, that's what it is for you in your memory. It hangs with you better than all the other memories. Those memories stand out when you claim it, especially at the end. And I think, while we're not at the end, we're getting closer. And if we will claim our insight, even if it is a fleeting insight, but claim it, it then becomes the real thing. It crystallizes all the suffering that happened previously, into something useful.
Yeah. It's a really interesting analogy for me in all of this around what you just said is that we finally have a vaccine, or several vaccines, for the coronavirus. And what's interesting is that when you drill down into the science behind a vaccine, or for that matter, behind immunology as a science altogether, the logic of it ultimately comes down to you introduce some chaos into your body to strengthen it. That's the point of immunization, is you're literally introducing a little bit of chaos, a little bit of the disease itself, of the virus itself, into the system in order to help it evolve and strengthen and grow and become stronger. And I think that's a really interesting thing to try to remember just for myself moving forward, is the suffering, the loss, the grief, the shock, just the change that's been wrought by this whole pandemic year, to say nothing of the political upheaval that's come along with some of it, is part of the chaos that is going to help our systems, our bodies, our souls, our spirits to evolve and grow and strengthen. And that in that regard, if you look at it through the right lens, it's not a loss. It's not just suffering. It's part of the heroic work, is the chaos that's been part of this. It's part of healing.
I agree with you. I am reminded of a phrase a friend of mine taught me, which is "no scar, no story." And I think ultimately, one of the adaptive qualities of a human being is to see themselves as the hero of their own story, and to realize that in the heroic journey, everybody loses at first. Everybody has a something taken away, and then it is out of what they do to overcome it that they actually become the hero that they were cornered to be.
That's right. Exactly. So that would be my highest hope for whatever I'm able to offer to people there at the church in March, is that they can be reminded of their own heroism and take it forward to do their teaching in the world, their ministry in the world, their good work in the world, to use some of what they learned, to take it forward into service. That would be my highest ideal.
I can see that happening, Greg. Last time I remember when you were here, I was so impressed with your ability to skillfully lead us toward our own conclusions, which is the mark of a true teacher, I think.
Thank you. There's servant leadership, I suppose.
Yeah. everybody's heard of somebody. I think Dylan said that, didn't he? And so, when you do your seminar, how long is it going to be? Is it 2 hours? Is that what
No,
it is?
I believe it's 3.
3.
I would love people to really get a chance to dive into the material at depth and also to share it in as a collective, not just individually, but to share the exploration with in your case, a beloved community of fellow seekers. So that's ideally what I want. But yeah, it's 3 hours.
Good. Well, the great thing is that you're going to do the Sunday message on the 14th of March, and then that afternoon you're going to do the webinar, so people have a chance to warm up and then finally dive in fully. I hope our people will do it. I think this is it. We really do need to prepare for coming out and not waste this year.
Yes.
So thank you, Gregg, for being with us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you as always. I wish you could be here in person. You have a radiant energy when you're here, and we'd love to have you. So when this is all over and things are back to normal, we'll have you back sometime.
Wonderful. I would love to come. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and I'm glad you could be with us. I will talk to you again sometime soon.